Candleheart by UmbraAurumDragon. It's been 7 years since Luffy first set out to sea. He found the One Piece and can finally return home to see Shanks. However, a chance discovery from an item he found with the One Piece allows Luffy to alter the event that forever changed him, but he has to be careful not to change the future. Ace saved. Time travel. The warlord of my channel are Claude Lefraise, Neoesker 23, Derek Dowdy, Zazu Syaz, Abdul Rauf Ali, In3WT, What_IF_Lord, Black Money _Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Ben Brownlee, Case Clark, Tristan Ward, KSGPL4YZ, Brian McKenzie. Join the channel membership if you would like to support the channel. Adios.
Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Candleheart Chapter 10 Reunion. Luffy. Why isn't it working? Yumi asked from Luffy's lap. Luffy scratched his head. It had always worked before. Why was it stopping now? He started shaking the watch violently. Stupid mystery watch. He said, "Don't break it," Yumi cried. It already is. Luffy mumbled. Sakatori continued his flight regardless. He was moving at a really fast pace. They were getting closer to Sabaody. Ace groaned behind Luffy. Some of his red blood was pouring out onto the bird's black feathers. He needed a doctor soon. Maybe it's out of power? Yumi suggested. Power? Luffy asked. Yeah, like how you get tired when you haven't eaten in a while. So it needs meat. Maybe something else. Like what? Luffy asked, looking down at her. Well, the only time I've ever felt anything similar to the feeling when we go back in time was when you saved me from those bad things and when your younger self made everyone fall asleep back at Marineford. So it runs on hockey? Yosh. Let me try something. Luffy used reinforcement hockey. He put it into his arm and down into his hand, changing it to a dark black grayish color. The watch changed to the same color. Luffy then tried Conqueror's hockey, allowing the energy to leave him as he tried to direct it into the watch. The watch began to heat up. She, it's working. Luffy kept it up, pouring the hockey into the watch. That's when things went wrong. The watch was absorbing too much power, and Luffy couldn't stop it. He started to lean forward, his vision becoming fuzzy. I don't feel good, he stated. Luffy, Yumi yelled, grabbing onto him, trying to wrestle the pocket watch out of his hands. Luffy's vision gradually darkened. Yumi managed to grab the object out of Luffy's clenched fist. But it was burning hot. She dropped it, and it fell down toward the cobalt blue ocean below. Sakatori, she yelled. The bird tilted his beak, and did a steep nosedive straight after the watch. It was getting closer and closer to the ocean. If it fell in, they would be stuck here forever. Yumi held on to Luffy, Ace and Grumpy. She tried to minimize their surface area so they would go faster. The pocket watch was still so far away, they would never reach it in time. The watch was about to touch the water when a hand snaked out from behind her. It stretched down and grabbed the watch just in time. Stupid thing stole all my hockey, Luffy said, retracting his arm as Sakatori pulled out of his dive and straightened out. Will it work now? Yumi asked. Let's see. Luffy opened it up and put the dial forward again. The air began to become thick with energy and the world began to spin. We're here, Luffy yelled. They flew around Sabaody, looking for the yellow submarine. It didn't take long for them to spot it. TRA guy is here. TRA guy? Yumi asked. Yeah, he's this doctor who uses a big sword and can switch people's bodies around. He's awesome. Huh? He's a pirate emperor, like Shanks. Yumi's eyes widened. Why do you always have to be friends with scary people? Luffy ignored her question as they landed on the deck of the submarine. A man walked out onto the deck, who was all too familiar to Luffy. He was carrying his sword. When he saw Luffy, he dropped it. His pupils dilated when he saw Ace on the giant bird's back. Straw hat. Yeah, Law said in a coarse whisper. He swallowed, looking utterly flabbergasted. TRA guy, hurry up, Ace is hurting. Law looked over to Ace. Straw Hat Yaw, help me get him inside. Yosh. That Law guy creeped Yumi out. The whole time they had been on the ship she had been hiding behind Luffy, too timid to go anywhere near the Emperor or his crew. They weren't anywhere near as nice and friendly as Shanks' crew. She was sitting beside Luffy on a bench. They were waiting for the creepy guy to finish healing Luffy's brother. Luffy didn't appear to enjoy waiting. He didn't move, he just stared at the door waiting. It seemed unnatural for him not to move for so long, it worried Yumi. The creepy guy walked out, taking off a pair of gloves. He'll be okay, Straw Hat Yaw, he just needs rest now. Can I go in and see him? Luffy asked him, instantly perkier. No, he needs to sleep and heal, wait till he's better. But TRA guy. Luffy whined. No, please, no. Can I have some meat while I wait then? No, can I? No, Law said, cutting him off. Just sit there and don't move and don't touch or break anything. Stupid boring TRA guy, says no to everything, Luffy pouted. Yumi glared at the man, surely Luffy could do something. That's when he noticed her glare, he returned it tenfold. She yelped and crawled into Luffy's lap. She stuck her tongue out at him and continued to glare, now in the safety of Luffy's arms. She. Luffy chuckled. Who's the brat? Law asked, looking at her. She's my new nakama, she helped me save Ace. I don't see how this tiny imp could be of any use. Yumi bit her lip, getting really mad at the creepy man. She clenched her sides, allowing a vision to consume him. His eyes widened in shock, he walked around the deck staring at nothing. He began to back away from something, looking really confused. He lifted his palm and said room. He seemed shocked when nothing happened. Luffy grabbed her shoulder. Hey Yumi, what are you showing him? She released the vision with a gasp. The creepy man looked around, then stared over at Luffy. What the hell? He asked. Luffy pointed at Yumi. She giggled nervously, before giving Luffy a betrayed look. Little brat. Law yelled. Luffy, she said, grabbing hold of his shirt. She. He laughed, ignoring her. She jumped out of Luffy's lap and ran across the deck. She suddenly found her arms detached from her body, she screamed. Luffy laughed, rolling on the deck, cacking himself. I can't believe you fell for that, Law. She does create a powerful image, he said, glaring down at her. The admirals fell for it too. Luffy chuckled. I can see her usefulness. Luffy, help. Yumi squealed. She, just reattach your arms, you'll be fine. I'll help, said a big white polar bear, walking out onto the deck. He began putting Yumi back together. He didn't seem to know the difference between her right and left arm though. There you go, all better. He grabbed her and pulled her into a hug. She crawled out of the embrace, and ran over to Luffy. She grumbled and sat in his lap, burying her head into his shirt. She would never do something like that again. Was she crazy? Aggravating an emperor, and Luffy hadn't even helped. I'm going downstairs, Straw Hat Yaw, don't do anything crazy. Sure, he said with his familiar smile. Yumi huffed, she had stood up for Luffy and he did nothing. Ace wondered where he was. Was he dead? He had felt himself die, but should there be pain when you were dead? Ace's whole body ached, and his dreams were so vivid, he kept reliving over and over the events that had happened up until his death. His crew coming to save him, Wars, Pops and Luffy. Especially Luffy. He had broken his promise, and the expression on Luffy's face as Ace bled out into his arms had been excruciating, yet worth it. All the pain was worth it if Luffy was alive. But would he ever find out what happened? Would the rest of his eternity be the dark prison of his mind, with only the replaying memories to watch? Or would he leave soon? He might not mind that, if he got to be with the old man again, yet part of him wanted to stay, to see Luffy live out his dream. Was this indecision why he was in this limbo? But all of a sudden it stopped. He could hear voices around him, bright lights shining into his eyes. Then it was over and the darkness consumed him again. The second time this happened, he heard Luffy. It's been days, TRA guy. Let me in to see him. No, said a second voice before they began to become fuzzy and his exhaustion overcame him again. The third time he opened his eyes fully. The room was dark. He felt something heavy on his legs. He looked down at them and saw the basting on them in the darkness. He smiled. Luffy was okay. He had made it out. He was now snoring away. What a dumbass, he thought before falling asleep again. This time though, there were no dreams and the sleep felt lighter. The final time he woke up, he sat up and looked around. He was alone in a dark room again. How long had it been since he last woke up, hours or days? He felt his chest. There was no scar. That was weird. Was he alive? A ghost or in some weird afterlife? He stood up, noticing finally his hunger. He walked out of the room, everything was dark, and it appeared to be the middle of the night. He walked out on deck. There he saw a man sitting on the railing at the front of the ship. He had a dark cloak fluttering around him in the midnight sea breeze. He was lean and tall with broad shoulders. He wore no weapons and didn't appear to be a threat. Ace walked up to him. He was halfway there and was about to demand to know what happened, when the man turned around. "Luffy?" Ace asked, flabbergasted. Luffy had gotten in trouble. He had snuck in to go see Ace, and TRA guy had yelled at him. He was sitting on the railing, mainly because this stupid ship didn't have a figurehead. Yumi had long since gone to bed, but he couldn't sleep, so he had come out on deck to look at the bright lights of Sabaody. He then heard someone walking up on deck, probably TRA guy coming to yell at him again. He pouted. He was too lazy to use his haki, so he just turned around. Luffy. It was Ace. He was awake. Luffy had seen him, sat with him and held him, yet seeing him awake brought the whole thing into reality. Ace was alive. "Ace," Luffy said quietly in shock. He jumped off the railing and took a few steps towards him. "You dumbass," Luffy yelled, clenching his fist and pulling it back to punch his brother. The punch got to within 1 inch of his face and stopped. The force from the punch caused Ace's hair to ruffle. His fist fell down and touched Ace's torso gently. Luffy leaned in and fell into his chest. Ace quickly managed to catch him and hold him in his arms. All of Luffy's emotions boiled up and exited through the tear ducts of his eyes. "Ace," he sobbed. "Ace." He said his brother's name again and again into his chest. With each time he said it, he pounded his chest gently. He then wrapped his arms around him tightly. He rested his head in the crook of Ace's neck and bawled loudly into his shoulder. "Ace, why did you take that blow for me?" Luffy sobbed, choking on his tears, which were now flowing down his face in a torrent. You promised you wouldn't die." "You idiot, stop crying. I had to save you. You're my kid brother, remember? Anyway, I'm still alive. I'm here now, aren't I? I'll never die," Ace smirked. "No, you died. You died. I couldn't save you. You died right in front of me. I was too weak to save you." Luffy sobbed. Ace's smirk disappeared. "I know it looked like I died. I thought I died too, but I'm still alive?" "No, 6 years. You were dead 6 years? What?" Ace was confused. What did Luffy mean, 6 years? Surely it couldn't have been more than a few days. He then took another look at Luffy. He was crying into his shoulder, hunched over. He had a huge scar on his chest, and stubble lining his jaw. A thick cloak was on his bare back and his shoulders were broader. Luffy stood up straight and looked at him. That's when Ace realized his little brother was an inch taller than him. What the hell? Luffy couldn't have changed that much in the few short months between when they met in Alabasta and now. He didn't look like a crazy kid anymore. He looked like a grown man. "Luffy, what happened? Where are we? Where are the Whitebeard pirates?" Luffy had let go of him and had fallen to the ground. He was now laying there on his back howling. When he finally managed to take a breath in between his sobs, he looked up and said, "Ace, I went back in time to save you. It's been 6 years since the Battle of Marineford." What the hell, Luffy? How? If anyone else had said that, he wouldn't believe them, but Luffy was a terrible liar. Luffy sat up and rubbed the back of his head. "I found a mystery pocket watch." Ace realized that's probably the best explanation he could get. "Where are we?" "On TRA guy's ship." "Who?" Ace had his question answered for him when Trafalgar Law stormed out onto the deck. "Straw Hat Yaw. I swear if you moved Fire Fist Yaw, I will never help you again." Luffy pouted. He stood up and jumped up onto Ace's back. He woke up. "I see." Ace had only heard of Trafalgar Law once or twice in passing. He looked at the man in front of him, then back to Luffy. "Luffy, why are we here?" "TRA guy said he'd help you." "Why?" Ace asked. She were in alliance." "That was years ago," Straw Hat Yaw. Law said, rubbing his temples. "I'm helping you now because you promised me a favor, remember? You saved Jimbei and me, so we're friends." Luffy sniveled. "We are not friends, and stop crying, you're hard to understand," Law grumbled. All this information was overloading Ace's brain. He thought the best course of action would be to thank the man. "Thank you for looking after my bumbling kid brother, and saving me." Ace didn't know all the details. He assumed that would cover it though. "Bumbling is an understatement," Law mumbled. "Ha ha ha ha, sorry if he's caused you trouble, I know he's a handful. I don't know how you survived growing up with him. I swear his idiocy is catching." Ace chuckled. He looked the man up and down. He did get himself into trouble a lot, almost got eaten multiple times. When we were in an alliance, he couldn't follow the simplest plan. Law sighed. Ace chuckled. The more he talked with the man, the more he liked him. He was thankful that Luffy had him. They also seemed to have a mutual understanding of Luffy's antics. "How much have you caught him up on Straw Hat Yaw?" Law asked Luffy. Luffy sniffed, trying to clear his nose. "Only that we saved him and that we took him 6 years into the future." "Shouldn't you tell him about his crew?" Ace looked at Luffy expectantly. Luffy looked uncomfortable. He lowered his head. "The Whitebeard pirates are all split up. The old man didn't make it." Hearing that felt almost worse than all the pain he had felt the past few days. Part of him knew Pops was dead, yet he had still hoped. He put his hand up to his head, trying to stop the tears about to form. The shock of everything was beginning to catch up with him though. "We can visit your graves if you want," Luffy said. "Huh?" Ace asked. "Red-haired Shanks and your crew buried you, Whitebeard and the rest of the pirates that didn't make it in the war," Law told him. "How can I be buried?" he asked. "We swapped you with a wax doll," Luffy chuckled. Ace was still confused, but he just accepted it. "Okay Luffy, let's go there." "Yosh!" Luffy yelled excitedly, tears and snot still pouring down his face. "Straw Hat Yaw, he's not completely healed yet," Law grumbled. "I'm fine," Ace said. She, let's get Yumi and go." "Aren't you going to tell him the most important thing?" Law asked. "What?" Luffy asked. "Never mind. He'll figure it out eventually." Law turned around and walked inside the ship, without another word. Ace watched Luffy as he ran towards the ship's cabin door. Tears were even now still running down his face. Though he was older, he was still so similar to how Ace remembered him, except now there seemed to be less of the childlike wonder in Luffy's eyes. He wondered whether his death had caused Luffy to change. Guilt built up inside him. He remembered the expression on Luffy's face as he had been dying back at Marineford. He imagined what would have happened if he hadn't managed to save Luffy, if he had been the one to be forced to live without his brother. "Oi Luffy," Ace called. Luffy paused and turned around. Thank you for saving me." Luffy smiled and tilted his head. "We're brothers, right? We always look out for each other." "Yeah." Ace's Mercado faced the sea. He covered his eyes and bit his lip, but he couldn't stop the tears from falling. He had lost his father, his crew. He had caused so much pain to them, to Luffy. That one question returned to his mind like a persistent cough. Did he deserve to live? Was Luffy right to bring him back? Luffy stretched his arms out and launched himself at Ace. He gave him one more hug. He whispered in a light sob into his ear. "Please don't leave again, it was lonely without you." Luffy then ran off back to the door and disappeared into the ship's cabin. Ace wiped away the tears. Geez, he didn't want Luffy to see him cry. With a brother like that though, maybe he did deserve to live. He smirked. He had only 2 jobs now. Look after his brother, and try to find his crew. He also needed to get his hat back, and pay respect to his father. But first, Ace needed food. Candle Heat Chapter 11 Luffy's Vivre card? Law couldn't believe what had just happened. Straw Hat Yaw had actually gone back in time and saved Fire Fist. He really could pull off anything. Law was beginning to think it was going way beyond luck. Law chuckled. He felt sorry for Fire Fist Yaw. Apart from the fact Luffy hadn't detached himself from his brother since he woke up, he also hadn't really given him any information on what was going on, including the fact that he had become the Pirate King. A fact that still surprised Law. He also seemingly forgot to tell Fire Fist about their other brother being alive. Law smirked as he rubbed his temples. Fire Fist was in for quite a few surprises. Law looked at the map sitting in front of him. He was planning on going the West Blue, and he didn't know how much longer he could stand Straw Hat Yaw, but he kind of wanted to see what would happen with Fire Fist. He didn't want to get too involved, but taking them to Fire Fist's grave wasn't too out of his way. Also, that bird Straw Hat Ya had been riding looked half dead. He really didn't want Straw Hat Ya to fall into the sea. Well, at least not yet. He made up his mind, he would accompany the brothers a little longer. "Oi, Straw Hat Ya," he called, walking up to him. "Let that bird go home, I'll take you where you need to go." "Sure," Luffy yelled, jumping around excitedly. Law was already reconsidering his decision. It always seemed like a good idea to team up with Straw Hat Ya until he saw him. Straw Hat Ya ran up and hugged Law. Law tensed. Shambles. He swapped places with Fire Fist Ya. Luffy didn't appear to mind and he just hugged Ace tight. Ace gave him a look of murder. He had only just managed to detach himself from Luffy. Law chuckled. Yumi Ya walked out from inside the ship. Luffy ran up to her to tell her the news. The little girl moaned. She muttered something about a creepy man. Law assumed was him. She was now complaining to Straw Hat Ya. She was acting like Luffy had just drop-kicked her cat. Apparently she hadn't forgiven Law for cutting her up. That girl worried Law. She was powerful. The image she had shown him seemed so real. Straw Hat Ya had found a potentially dangerous new crewmate. Fire Fist laughed at Luffy. He rested his elbows on the submarine's railings. "Don't you have stuff to do, Luffy?" he asked. "Nah, my crew can handle it. We'll meet up with them soon." Luffy chuckled. The large black bird collapsed to the ground. It looked at Law as if he was his savior. "I know the feeling, bird," Law said under his breath. Chopper was fretting. He always worried when Luffy was gone for long periods of time, normally because when he came back he would be covered in wounds and blood. He fiddled with his shirt and walked up to Robin. "Robin," he said, looking up at her. "Do you think Luffy's okay?" She smiled. "I'm sure he's fine," she said, patting his head. "Of course Luffy is super okay. He's the Pirate King," Frankie said, walking up to them. "He's also still Luffy, who knows what he's gotten himself into," Nami said from underneath one of her tangerine trees. "I wonder if he's lost a limb like red hair," Robin said, absent-minded. Chopper's mouth dropped. "That's not helping Robin," Frankie said with a sigh. "Yo-ho-ho-ho-ho, he'll probably meet us at the meeting spot a few days after we get there," Brook said with a laugh. "That idiot wouldn't pass up a chance to see his brother," Sanji said, giving everyone a drink around the circle of conversation that had formed. "I hope so," Chopper said, eyes downcast. "We miss him too," Brook said, patting his shoulder. "Yeah, the ship feels empty without him, doesn't it?" Nami asked. They all nodded in agreement. "Nami, how long till we're there?" Frankie asked, after a brief pause. "We'll be there in just over 2 days," she replied. "And we get to see Koala and Sabo again?" Chopper asked with wide eyes. "Yes, of course," Robin said with a laugh. "I look forward to seeing them too." Usopp suddenly ran over from the other end of the sunny. "Hey Chopper, Brook, Frankie, want to play a game?" he asked in a huff. "What is it?" Chopper asked, tilting his head. "I call it, how many chopsticks can fit into Zoro's snoring mouth?" he said with a sly smile. "Yo-ho-ho-ho-ho, I want to play," Brook yelled, running past Usopp. "Me too," Chopper said with a giggle. "I had to see this." Sanji smirked, following them. Nami, Robin and Frankie also followed them to the other side of the ship, where Zoro's snoring form was leaning against the side of the ship. Usopp and Brook had already gotten 3 chopsticks each into his mouth and he hadn't moved, so Chopper decided it was safe enough to add a few himself. In no time Zoro's mouth was overflowing with chopsticks, and now the 3 of them were worried he'd wake up if they stuffed another one in. Sanji was laughing hysterically, almost crying at the green-haired swordsman. "I don't think we can fit any more in," Usopp said. "No, I don't believe we can," Brook replied. "Keep going, there's still plenty of room," Nami chuckled. "If you think so, you do it," Usopp told her. "No way, I don't want to get killed," she said, backing off. "Chicken," Usopp teased. Chopper and Brook joined in teasing her and egging her on until she looked like she was about to explode. "Fine, you guys were doing it wrong anyway," Nami said, walking over and snatching a few chopsticks. "How about we make a bet?" she said with a sly smile. 10,000 berries. I can shove 5 more into his mouth." Before the others could reply, she shoved the 5 down his throat. Although the food on the Heart Pirates ship wasn't exactly restaurant quality, it was certainly better than the food from Impel Down. He and Luffy together managed to eat over half of the ship's stock of food. Luffy was reaching across to different people's plates, stealing their food, normal Luffy behavior. When he went for Ace's, Ace was ready for him. He grabbed Luffy's arm when it snaked its way onto his plate. Luffy paused for a second to look at Ace. Granted, he was still stuffing his face with his other hand. Ace smirked. "What you going to do, Luffy?" Ace asked. They stared into each other's eyes, waiting for someone to make the first move. Ace looked down at his plate. It was empty. Ace let go of Luffy to grab his head with both hands. Where the hell had his food gone? Luffy stood up and swallowed his last bit of meat. "Thanks for the food." He looked down at Ace and grinned. He then ran off. "You jerk!" Ace yelled, getting up and chasing him onto the deck. Luffy fell onto the wood and rolled on the ground laughing. "You're older than me now, Luffy, act like it." Ace glared at him. He walked over and hit Luffy on the head. He expected him to complain or a bump to form, but Luffy kept on laughing. The only difference was that now he was louder. Did Luffy just control hockey? Maybe he hadn't matured much, but Luffy was definitely stronger. Ace remembered him using Conqueror's hockey back at Marineford, but seeing him able to control it was strange. "When did you learn to do that, Luffy?" he asked. "Just after the battle at Marineford. Rayleigh taught me," Luffy chuckled. "Rayleigh?" Ace asked. "Yosh, he's super strong and trained me for a year and a half. I could be stronger than you now, Ace." "Impossible," Ace replied. "You may be older now, Luffy, but I'm still the older brother and you're still a crybaby." She, not anymore," says the one who has been crying all day. Ace walked over and lay down next to Luffy. They looked up into the starry night sky together. "We can have so many more adventures now," Luffy chuckled. The thought brought a smile to Ace's face. "Yeah, I would like that. We can go hunting again and steal eggs and fly on Sakatori." Luffy was getting excited again. "Remember when you almost got eaten by that crocodile?" Ace chuckled. "That was your fault," Luffy grumbled. "And the centipede." "HMMMF." Luffy grumbled. "And the anaconda." Ace was clutching his sides laughing. Luffy's face softened and he laughed. "LL have to have another match to see who's the strongest." "I bet I could beat you now," Luffy smirked. "Oh, you reckon?" Ace chuckled. "I don't think I could ever lose to you." "Just you wait and see, I'm stronger now." Luffy sat up. "I look forward to it." Ace chuckled. They spent the rest of the night recalling old memories and laughing together. When they grew tired, they fell asleep next to each other, just as they used to do. When morning came, Ace woke up but stayed lying there next to Luffy with his eyes closed, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his skin. Luffy then sat up. Ace didn't move and just kept pretending to sleep. "It's my turn to be the older brother, Ace," Luffy said. "I won't let anything else happen to you." Ace clenched his fists. He now felt like he understood what it was like to be Luffy growing up with two older brothers. Somewhere in the past few years, Luffy had overtaken him. He was stronger now. Ace could feel it. The hard part now was accepting that his brother didn't need his protection anymore. Regardless, Ace would always be there to keep him safe, no matter what. It was his promise to Sabo. Zoro's eye opened. He spat out some weird sticks across the ship. He looked around expecting to see Usopp. However, Nami appeared to be the culprit. He glared at her. She giggled and slowly backed away. "Zoro? The others made me do it." He glared over at Chopper, Usopp and Brook. All four of them suddenly ran, and he could get them later. He was still tired. He fell back to sleep. He woke up thirsty. He wanted some booze. He looked around. The chef and Nami were gone. He smirked. He could break into the freezer. The freezer where Sanji hid the meat from Luffy was downstairs. He walked down and into the room. Nami was inside and turned around and saw him. Apparently she had been hiding from him. "Come on, Zoro, it was just a joke," she said, walking backwards, waving her hands in front of her face. He started walking up to her, when the door slammed behind him. "Oh shit." He turned around and pulled at the handle. It was locked. Goddammit, he couldn't even use his swords, otherwise Frankie would kill him for breaking the ship and the stupid Spiral Brow would complain about the broken freezer room. Nami started twitching. "Are we locked in?" she asked. "Yeah," Zoro said, grabbing some booze. "Someone will come get us out soon. Till then, I'll take a nap." "What the hell, it's freezing in here. Get us out of here, you jerk," she yelled. "If you get cold, don't come near me," he grunted as he took a sip. "I wouldn't want to," she yelled. "Hey, it's not my fault you wear pretty much nothing." "It's not my fault we're locked in here." Zoro rolled over. "Night," he said, closing his eye. After a few minutes, Nami apparently got too cold in her flimsy attire and came and sat next to him in a grumpy huff. He smirked, and in no time at all he was asleep. Sabo was so glad to be out on the sea again. He was most looking forward to seeing Luffy though. It had been too long since he had seen his little brother, and he wanted to see what kind of treasures the new Pirate King had found. Although it was not all fun and games, they were headed to a meeting place where all the leaders of the Revolutionary Army would converge, and on a serious matter too. He hoped the information Luffy would give him would help, because there was a battle coming, and every last hint of information might decide the winner. He looked out across the sea. He wondered if they might even meet Luffy along the way. He looked to the left, then to the right. He was curious as to which direction he would come from. He took off his top hat, and reached inside it into a little pocket. Inside was a little piece of vivre card with Luffy's name on it. He pulled it out and placed it on his palm and waited for it to move. 1 second, nothing. 2 seconds, nothing. 10 seconds, nothing. Sabo began to panic. Why wasn't it moving? This had never happened before. Was his little brother okay? He looked at it again. It looked slightly transparent. Was Luffy dying somehow? Wouldn't it get smaller if he was dying? There was one way to find out. He ran across the deck towards the door to the cabins. He bumped into Koala on the way down. "Hey Sabo, what's the hurry?" she asked. All Sabo heard was a mumble though. His mind was completely focused on getting to the room where the transponder snails were kept. He couldn't lose another brother. Brook was tuning his violin when a noise rang out across the ship. Brook followed the noise till he came into the room with the ship's main transponder snail in it. It was ringing loudly. Brook picked it up and it made its typical clicking noise. "Yo ho 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 ho, Brook here," he said into the receiver. "Where is Luffy?" A voice on the other end of the line asked in a desperate tone. "Who is this?" he asked. "Sabo, oh hello, how are you?" "Skeleton. Where is Luffy? He said he had something to do with red-haired Shanks." "He's not with you." "No. What is the problem?" "Look at your vivre card of Luffy. Let me know if you find out anything." Kerchunk. The phone hung up. Brook took out Luffy's vivre card and looked at it. Uh-oh. Brook ran out on deck in hysteria. He was yelling and screaming, "We have a problem." Once the crew had managed to settle him down, they all looked at Luffy's vivre card. "What have you done this time, Luffy?" Frankie sighed with a shake of his head. "Luffy's dying." Usopp yelled in hysterics. "What do we do?" Chopper cried. "We follow the captain's orders. We go meet Sabo and wait for Luffy," Sanji said in a no-arguments tone. The crew all nodded, all with varying degrees of worry. Brook decided to play a song to try lifting the crew's spirits, but their worry was not abated. Robin looked out across the water. Their destination was coming closer and closer. She was anxious to talk to Sabo and the other revolutionaries. She had so much to tell them, and so many questions to ask. Number one being, what possibly could be the reason for the way Luffy's vivre was acting? She had been studying all the books they had on the ship, trying to find anything on why a vivre card would stop moving. All she had found were rumors and theories, and none of them were good. Sanji had managed to take charge and calm the crew temporarily, but everyone was scared. Something had happened to Luffy and they had no way to find out what. They just hoped someone from the Revolutionary Army would have some clue. The ship pulled into the bay and they docked. To say they attracted attention would be an understatement. The meeting place was a small island that was under control of the Revolutionary Army. So the appearance of a pirate ship that hadn't been seen in months at the meeting place of the revolutionaries appeared to terrify the townsfolk. Sabo and Koala were waiting for them. "Sabo, Koala," Robin exclaimed, running up to hug her old friends. "Robin, it's good to see you again," Koala said with a smile. "Did you find anything out about Luffy?" Sabo asked. "No," Robin replied. "We have no idea what happened to him." "Well, I just managed to track down Red Hair's transponder snail number. Why don't we go inside and see if we can find anything?" Robin followed Sabo and Koala into town, followed closely by the rest of the crew. All of them eager to find out what had happened to their captain. They walked up a pathway to an old house. Flowers lined the path and greeted them with a sweet aroma. The willows on either side of the house blowing in the wind. They looked like dancing dryads, their branches beckoning them into the building. The house reminded Robin of somewhere an old lady might live. Its roof was thatched and there was an old rocking chair on the porch. "This is where I've been staying since we got here," Sabo said, walking up the steps and inviting them inside. They sat around a table with a transponder snail sitting at its center. It appeared to be one with a wide range considering its size. Sabo picked up the receiver and handed it to Sanji. He then typed in a new L. It rang twice before it clicked. "Hello?" the voice on the other end of the line said. "Red hair?" Sanji asked. "Yep, that's me. Is that you, Sanji?" "Yay, hey red hair. We were wondering how Luffy is. His Vivre card is acting up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Dahahaha. Bet you guys are doing crazy," he laughed. "This is no time for jokes. Where's our dumbass captain?" "You have nothing to worry about. I'm sure he'll be with you soon. And he'll probably have a surprise for you," Shanks said slyly after finally stopping laughing. "But where is he?" Sanji asked. "You'll see. Talk to you later, bye." He hung up. "He's almost as bad as you, Sabo," Koala huffed. Robin giggled behind her hand. They hadn't got any answers, but if Red Hair said Luffy was safe, she would trust him. Sabo let out a sigh. "I guess we just have to wait then. In the meantime, why don't I cook us some lunch? Nami Swan Robin Schwan, what would you like?" "I don't mind, Sanji," Robin said with a smile. Wait. Where's Nami?" Sanji said, looking around the room. "Zoro's not here either," Frankie said, looking around. "I'll go back to the ship and find them," Sanji yelled, standing. "Zoro probably got lost," Usopp said with a sigh. "With Nami?" Chopper asked. "Maybe they're alone together," Robin said. Sanji heard this just before he was about to open the door. He turned around, fire in his eyes. "I'm going to kill that stupid Marimo." He ran out the door without another word, leaving the rest of them in silence. Candle Heart. Chapter 12, Uru Island, by Sakatori. Luffy said to the bird. They were on an island, back in the past. Yumi was crying and holding the bird. Luffy was joining her in a tearful farewell. Ace was reading a newspaper he found, apparently still stunned at Luffy's new time travel item. "We'll see you in a few years," he told the bird. It nodded and gently nudged Yumi away before it spread its huge ebony black wings. The light shining through them only made them look more majestic. The bird launched itself into the air and flew off, letting out a few trills as a goodbye. "I'm going to miss him," Yumi said, sniffing. "We'll see him again," Luffy told her. "But he won't see us for years, won't he get lonely?" Yumi asked. Luffy thought about it for a while. "Maybe he has his own nakama he'll be with." That seemed to calm her down. Luffy picked her up and placed her on his shoulders, which earned a giggle. "Ace, let's go," he yelled out. Ace dropped the newspaper and grabbed Luffy's shoulder as he moved the dial forward. They didn't see the bird let out a sigh of relief, nor did they see him look back one last time. Sanji didn't think he'd ever run so fast. No way that stupid Marimo was putting his hands on Nami's swan. He ran through the town, skidding around corners and bends. He finally made it to the dock. He ran up the gangplank, searching for the two with his haki. He looked around the ship until he finally sensed the two of them below deck. He jumped down the stairs 3 at a time and ran through the ship's corridors to the kitchen. He yanked open the door to the freezer room. There, sitting in the corner, was his beautiful Nami swan. But she was sleeping, laying her head on the stupid swordsman's shoulder. Sanji stared wide-eyed and mouth agape at the two. He couldn't move. He was totally flabbergasted. If only he had noticed Nami's disappearance earlier. Nami opened her eyes and sat up with a yawn. "Sanji, is that you?" she asked, standing up. Sanji's response was a muffled squeak. "Thanks for finally finding us. It was getting really cold," she said, walking over. Zoro said, getting up. "Did someone finally find us?" "Oh, it's you, Cook. You took your time." Hearing this shattered Sanji's surprise. He jumped over and attacked Zoro. "You stupid Marimo. How dare you touch my precious Nami swan?" "I wasn't touching the witch, you stupid spiral brow." Nami glared at him but took the opportunity to leave and get a blanket to warm up. "Hey Sanji, can you make me something warm?" she said sweetly, interrupting the fight. "Of course, Nami swan," Sanji said, wriggling around. "Oh, me too?" Zoro asked. Sanji glared at him before replying. "Go make it yourself, baka," Zoro grunted and walked upstairs. "So what's been happening, Sanji?" Nami asked from under the blanket, sipping at her hot chocolate Sanji had just quickly made and handed her. Luffy's vivre card stopped moving. He replied as he began to make her some food. She splattered hot chocolate out of her mouth. What has he done this time? Probably something insane. Sanji sighed. There's no doubt about that, she replied, mimicking his sigh. I assume we made it to the meeting point. Yeah, met up with Sabo and Koala and called Shanks. He said not to worry about Luffy. Nami visibly relaxed a little. That's good. Do we know when the meeting is? No, I rushed over before I could ask. I think I'm okay now. Let's get Zoro and see the others. Nami said. Sanji let out a huff but nodded and started to head up onto the deck. The swordsman was waiting there napping in the sun. The tinge of blue that was on his skin now gone, as well as Nami's. Sanji kicked his thigh. Get up, he told him before heading down the gangplank behind Nami. Zoro grunted but did as he was told. Sanji was still mad at him. He would never forgive him for this. Oh, if only he had gotten locked in that tiny room with Nami's swan, he thought to himself with a smile. Sanji led them into town and walked up into the house. As he opened the door, he pulled out a cigarette and said, "Found them." Albeit his tone was not a happy one. "Koala," Nami said, running up and embracing her. "Nami, we were worried about you and Zoro. What happened?" she asked. "The idiot got us locked in a freezer," Nami said, the veins on her forehead becoming visible. "Lucky you didn't freeze to death," Robin said. "Don't say such morbid things so casually," Chopper yelled at her. She brought her hand to her lips and giggled behind it. "So when's the meeting?" Sanji asked. "In just over a week," Koala replied with a smile. "That's super. That gives time for Luffy to come back," Frankie yelled, striking a pose. Would he ever get sick of that? Sanji pondered. "There's one problem though," Sabo said, running his hands through his hair. "The Revolutionary Army only wants one of you there. 2 if Luffy gets here on time, but if he doesn't, they only want Robin in the meeting." "Understandable," Usopp said, obviously glad not to have to meet a huge number of powerful leaders. "As much as I don't want to see Ivankov again, someone has to go with Robin to look after her," Sanji said. "I'll be fine," she told him, smiling. "You sure?" Jinbei asked. "Of course, I'll have Sabo and Koala, won't I?" This information calmed the crew down considerably. They accepted it and moved back to the topic of their captain. "Maybe he'll get here before the meeting, with more information," Brooke suggested. "Hopefully," Sabo said with a smile. "I feel like I'm turning into lasagna," Luffy complained as he spayed himself out across the deck. "Come on Luffy, it's not that hot," Ace told him. Luffy didn't hear that statement though, because now his thoughts were on food and lasagna. Ace rolled his eyes, knowing exactly what his brother was thinking about. "Hey Law, there's a desert island called Uru, close by here, isn't there?" Ace asked the surgeon. "Yes, we're stopping there for supplies," Law replied as he walked up to him. Glancing down at Luffy, he sighed. "Luffy, yeah, I can buy you, your brother and the little annoying one food while there." "Really? Thanks TRA guy," Luffy said, perking up. "You 3 can explore the island after that while we get what we need. We'll only be a few hours, so don't go far." Luffy ignored him and looked over at the approaching island. They had only recently surfaced from underwater, and Luffy had hated every second. The minute the submarine had surfaced, he had run out on deck only to be confronted by the intense heat. He then noticed something weird about the island. The sand was a dark blue. It reminded him of the night sky. The houses looked like little bright stars on the inky blue sea of sand. "Woo-ah," Luffy said as they got closer. Things only become weirder from then on. Luffy had never been to this island. It was one of the many few he hadn't traveled to. Law watched Luffy's expression as they got closer and smirked. Luffy then noticed the ships. They had sails, small boxes big enough to fit 2 people, and decks, but they were on the sand. No water was around them. Occasionally animals popped up out of the sand and floated in the air until they dived back down. "Whoa-ah," Luffy repeated. "So cool, ha 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 ha. You still find wonderment in everything, don't you, Luffy?" Ace asked him. "You've been here before?" Luffy asked. "Yeah, Marco and I took a detour here after a mission. We heard there were caves here that interested us. They are awesome, Luffy. I want to tame the biggest one," was Luffy's only reply, looking over at the creatures jumping out of the sand. They were a bright red that contrasted highly with the dark sand. They had thin bodies, shaped in a large oval, with long thin tails of bright green. They're called the stingrays of the blue sand. Doctors flock here for their tails. The males have a medicinal antidote, whilst the females have a deadly toxin. I should get one for Chopper, Luffy said, staring at them wide-eyed. The ship pulled into the bay, and they docked. The gangplank was being put down, but before it could even finish, the closest restaurant. Ace and Law glanced at each other with knowing looks before following after him. Luffy came to a large white building. It, like all of the other buildings, had shiny, new metal roofs. He ran in and sat at the bar. Food, lasagna. Meat. Food. He was almost drooling when a disgruntled Yumi, Ace, Law and some of his crew walked in and sat next to him. It wasn't long till the food was served. Luffy wanted to provide some entertainment while they were eating. He sneakily reached a few seats over and used his stretched-out arm to steal Law's hat and sword. He retracted his arm quickly before Law could react. He put the hat on and leaned the sword on his shoulder. Hey Ace, Yumi, I'm TRA guy, he said, lifting up his hand palm down and putting on a grouchy frown. I do not look like that straw hat, ya. Now give my stuff back, he demanded menacingly. She, nope, Luffy replied, jumping up. I don't like bread, he continued, chuckling to himself. Law's crew chortled at that remark. Luffy continued to do impressions till Law apparently lost his patience. He smirked and lifted up his hand, palm down. Room, he said. Luffy looked at him, his head cocked to the side. What you doing, TRA guy? Law's smile widened. Shambles. Suddenly Law's hat and sword were back in his arms, and all Luffy's food was gone, replaced with sand. No way. Law. The food. Luffy looked distraught. Ace started laughing his head off. Yumi followed suit. Law, give me back my food, Luffy whined. Law gave in and returned the food, of which Luffy promptly ate. Ace, let's go explore, Luffy said as he finished. Sure, Luffy, Ace said, standing up and following him. Yumi glanced at Law. He smiled at her, and she ran after Luffy, who was waiting outside for her. After Luffy had managed to tame one of the creatures, which he creatively dubbed Ray, Luffy turned to face Ace. Ace, want to have a match? He asked. Sure thing. Ace grinned at Luffy. He wanted to see just how strong his little brother had become. Luffy yelled, raising his hands into the air. He looked way too excited. Yumi, keep score, okay? Luffy asked the girl. She nodded. Not that we need to keep score, I'll win every match, like always, Ace said with a smirk. Luffy chuckled and moved away from him on the night like sand. He made a familiar fighting stance. Ace couldn't help but smile fondly at the memories arising to his mind. He shook his head. He wouldn't let himself get distracted. He lowered his center of gravity, turned slightly side-on with his feet apart and raised his fists. Luffy looked at him. There was a determined fire in his eyes. Ace knew Luffy wouldn't go easy on him, so neither would he. Gear second. A very noticeably pink, steaming Luffy suddenly ran towards him with a battle cry. Was Luffy mocking him? This was almost exactly the same as all his old attacks, excluding the pinkness. Luffy suddenly disappeared. Ace was confused for a second. His haki was almost completely gone. Then he felt a heavy weight on the side of his face. He was launched meters away. He sat up dazed. What? Yumi moved back quite a bit. As Ace was getting up, he heard Luffy shout out again. He was back to his normal color, but his forehead was a dark gray with armored haki. He shot his head back and head-butted Ace. Ace slid backwards on the sand. Luffy attacked Ace again. This time he was ready. He used his own haki to deflect the blow. He then made his own attack using his fire to try burn Luffy. It did nothing against his haki-infused skin. They scuffled, constantly making and dodging attacks. Ace began to take the upper hand until Gear third, Luffy yelled. When Ace saw what Luffy's arm turned into, he fell on his back laughing. It was huge. He cried with tears of intense humor. That was until he got beaten. Bad. He recovered quickly, firing his own attacks, but too little avail. As the fight progressed, Luffy kept revealing new abilities. Just how versatile was Luffy's devil fruit? Ace used to think it was useless, but seeing how Luffy used it now, he could see its true value, and yet, any other person with this devil fruit probably wouldn't be anywhere near crazy enough to think up the techniques Luffy was using. It didn't take long for Ace to get tired and receive quite a few bruises. By now he was so sick of hearing Gomu Gomu no. He might explode the next time Luffy said it. The fight lasted over an hour. They had luckily chosen a spot out in the middle of nowhere as there were burn holes and crater holes everywhere from various attacks. Ace was noticing something though. Although Luffy was getting the odd bruise here and there, he wasn't yet using his full power, he was still holding back. This made Ace mad. He was surely past warlord level with the amount of power he had seen. Just how much more did Luffy have? Suddenly Luffy stopped. "I'm hungry," Luffy stated, sitting down rubbing his grumbly belly. Ace laughed. They had only just eaten. It was good to know his brother was still a bottomless pit. He offered Luffy a hand and they stood up. "We'll finish the match later," Luffy said with a chuckle. "Sure thing," Ace replied, grasping his arm. Ace knew that Luffy was the obvious winner, but he was sure he'd be able to catch up soon. Then the matches would be even again, or rather not perfectly even but even in his favor, he chuckled. Luffy then looked around. "What's up?" Ace asked. "Where's Yumi?" he asked. They looked around and spotted her peeking out from behind a rock over a kilometer away. "Is it over?" she whimpered, coming closer. "Yosh," Luffy as she got close. "You guys are crazy," she said with a terrified look on her face. Hidden behind it though, Ace could see exhilaration. She, food 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 food. Luffy began humming as he walked off. Ace smiled at his back and followed behind him. Once they had gotten more food for Luffy, the three of them set out to go find the caves Ace had told them about. As soon as they walked outside the restaurant, Yumi held on to the edge of Luffy's shorts. Luffy had told him a little about her. Being raised as a slave had caused her to have distrust in many people, although she seemed to be warming up to Ace. Ace walked up to one of the sand ships. He asked the owner for usage of it for the afternoon and told Luffy and Yumi to hop on. He thanked the man and pushed the ship outside the line of houses and hopped on himself. He lowered the sail, and the instant it opened a gust of wind pushed it forward at an amazingly fast speed. "What happens if there is no wind?" Yumi asked. "One of the giant stingrays pulls the ship," he replied. "Awesome," Luffy chuckled. "We should get Ray to pull it." Ace rolled his eyes and looked up into the sky. Something had seemed off about the town when he was there. It had seemed deserted, but looking at the thunder clouds in the sky, he decided to attribute the lack of people to the impending storm. The sand ship surfed across the sand. Stingrays followed behind them, jumping out of the sand. The hot sun beat down on their shoulders. Within minutes their skin began to tan and burn. Luffy groaned, stretching out on the deck. Yumi was sitting under the little shade cabin area and Ace was at the front of the ship steering the sand surfing ship. After 10 minutes Ace pulled the ship to a stop. He raised the sail and jumped off the boat. "Coming, Luffy?" he asked, looking back at him. Luffy looked around confused. "There's nothing here," he said, scratching his head. Ace smiled and walked across the sand. He looked back at Luffy and fell backwards. "Ace!" Luffy yelled as Ace fell down. Luffy and Yumi ran up to where Ace had disappeared, but scrambled to a stop at the side of a crevice. They looked down at Ace, who was standing in ankle-deep water. He smirked up at them. Luffy grabbed Yumi and jumped into the shallow water. Ace chuckled as the two looked around. The ice-cold water stretched out for kilometers in the huge cavern. At the cavern's edges plants, flowers and trees were growing. Animals round the bright cavern. The small sliver of sun filtering through the hole in the roof reflected across the crystal surfaces of the cavern walls and the ice stalagmites and stalactites coming out of the water and roof. "What's this? It's awesome," Luffy said, wide-eyed. Yumi shivered. "Why is it so cold?" she asked. "The spring erupting from underground is rumored to come from a nearby winter island," Ace said, walking towards one of the walls. "The cavern stretches on for miles under the island in ravines. The inhabitants of the island use this place for mining and food," he said, touching the crystal surface. Luffy was still looking around wide-eyed. "The male rays lick the icicles, that's where they get the antidote in their tails from. The ice is sweet and said to have medicinal properties that the stingrays enhance." "Sweet?" Luffy asked, running over to one sticking out of the water. "Luffy, don't," Ace tried to warn him, but to no avail. Luffy wrapped his arms around the ice and began to lick it. Luffy said. "It's sweet." Ace's head fell back and he laughed. Luffy's tongue was stuck to the ice. Ha 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 ha, you idiot, Wath, he said, hanging from the tip of the ice from just his tongue. Luffy pushed his hands and feet against the ice and he tried to detach his tongue. Shouldn't we help? Yumi looked up at Ace. Nope, he can get himself out of this mess, he chuckled. Please the melt the ICTHE? Luffy whined. Yumi chuckled behind her hand. Luffy was now on the ground moving away from the ice, his tongue stretching with him, showing no sign of coming off. He turned to face the ice. Gomu Gomu no bazooka, he said, pulling his arms back and hitting the ice. It exploded upon impact, however, a huge piece of ice was still attached to his tongue. As his tongue retracted, it came straight at his face. It hit him and he fell backward into the water. He flayed around in the water. Ace walked over and picked him up by the collar. A huge chunk of ice was in his mouth. You trying to drown yourself? Ace roared with laughter. Luffy crossed his arms and huffed. He stretched out his lips and swallowed the ice whole. He poked out his tongue and wiggled out of Ace's grasp. He began chasing around Yumi. Ace watched as they splashed water at each other. We should go. Law might leave without us if we're late. Law walked into a nearby supply shop. He couldn't help but notice the place was partially destroyed. He was curious as to what had happened. A lot had changed since last time he was here. The roofs of the houses weren't metal, and kids had been running through the streets. Something was definitely wrong. He only hoped that he wouldn't get caught up in it. His curiosity wouldn't be worth the trouble. He grabbed what he needed and walked over to the owner. It wouldn't hurt to ask what was wrong. He needed to be prepared for the worst after all. What's happened here? He asked the owner as he was tallying up the items Law was buying. Criminals have been taking advantage of the rain, he said, his face void of emotion. The rain? Law asked. Yes, didn't you see the sign at the front of the town? Law grimaced. I was distracted by a certain someone. What did it say? It started a few months ago. Everyone who was out in the open either got sick or died. What? The rain, it's toxic. Law stood up. When will the next rain come? From the looks of the sky, in only about half an hour. Straw Hat yaw. Law groaned, running out of the shop. How does he always manage to get caught in these situations? Luffy already missed the cool underground caves. Even though the sky was now overcast, it was still very hot. He was excited to get back soon. He could see his crew. They would be so surprised to see Ace, he chuckled. With the way the wind was gusting, it looked like they'd get back soon. Just as Luffy was thinking this, the wind stopped. Yay, we get to see Ray Ray. Okay, call him Luffy, Ace told him. It didn't take long for the Ray to show up. They connected the harness and were off in no time. Ace was still steering the ship. Luffy looked across the sand and smiled as the wind from the Ray's speed ruffled his hair. He then felt something drip onto his arm. Enormous pain shot from the spot. He gripped it. Where had that come from? He looked to the sky, a theory bubbling into his mind. He stood up and walked over to Ace. Hey Ace, can I steer? You and Yumi can sit in the little cabin. Ace thought about it, then nodded and conceded his spot and sat in the little cabin next to Yumi. In a flash, Luffy jumped over and shut the cabin door and locked it. He imbued the walls with haki so Ace couldn't get out. He moved to the front of the ship and told the Stingray to hurry. In minutes the rain was falling heavily. Each drop on Luffy's felt like hot needles poking through his skin. Luffy groaned in pain, not even noticing now where the ray was taking them. Ace and Yumi banged on the cabin door. Luffy! Ace screamed, pounding on the haki-imbued wood. What's going on? Luffy! Let us out! Yumi begged. Luffy grunted in pain. Are you okay, Luffy? Ace asked. I'm fine, Luffy said, leaning against the other side of the door. Luffy! Ah! Yumi screamed, gripping her arm. What happened? Ace asked. Yumi was about to answer when something dripped from the cabin roof onto his leg. He gripped it, biting his tongue. This rain was pouring outside on Luffy. Luffy! 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 He screamed. Open this door. There was no answer. Luffy, Candle Heart Chapter 13 Uru Island Part 2. Ace banged on the door of the cabin till his hands bled. Yumi had curled into a ball and was crying in the corner. Ace hadn't heard a sound in an hour except for the pouring rain, which taunted him. How could he have let this happen? He promised Sabo he'd look after Luffy. The rain kept on falling through the cracks of the wood. As each one landed, it sizzled against the ground, burning a scorch mark into it. Each time a drop hit Ace or Yumi they yelped in pain. Ace couldn't believe Luffy was drenched in this. He didn't want to believe it. Suddenly the rain stopped, the ship slid to a stop. Ace waited what seemed like an eternity, but eventually the hockey on the walls and door disappeared, they were free. He banged the door down and ran out looking around for his little brother. Yumi followed closely behind. They saw the man they were looking for slumped up against the mast. Luffy. Ace ran up to him, he checked his pulse, he was alive. Yumi ran back inside and took out a little first aid kit. She began rubbing a bomb she found into Luffy's burnt skin. Once she finished a section, Ace grabbed some bandages and wrapped them around him. He was hurt, bad. We need to get him to Trafalgar, Ace said, tying up the last bandage. He stood up and finally noticed, they were in a huge cavern, different to the caves below the desert as it was above ground, but it appeared to be connected, as it also had water and crystal walls. He looked outside the cave and his heart leapt into his mouth. The rain was still pouring outside, they were trapped, with no way to get Luffy to a doctor. Yumi was no doctor, but she couldn't sit down, cry and do nothing. Ace had gone out to explore the cave and to try to find something to help them. He had looked so mortified when he saw Luffy. Yumi could tell how close they were and assumed he needed some time alone. In the meantime, Yumi tended to Luffy's skin, trying to keep his skin cool by placing clean wet cloths on unbandaged areas. He was sleeping soundly, yet every now and then he grimaced in pain. Every time he flinched, Yumi almost started crying again. He did this so they could be safe. He knew someone had to steer the boat. They were lucky they got to the cave when they did. The water had begun to seep through the wood. When Yumi thought she couldn't do any more, she curled up into a ball next to Luffy. She had never had someone protect her like that before, except her cat. She smiled, glad that she had left Grumpy on the submarine. All she wanted right now more than anything, was for Luffy to be okay. The thought of him not waking up crossed her mind and she shivered at the loneliness she suddenly felt. No, Luffy was strong, he'd be okay, she had to trust him. She had seen him and Ace fight, and she felt exhilarated by just being near the fight. Terrified, but excited, safe and proud to be on the crew of such a powerful man. She couldn't wait to meet the rest of the crew. Luffy had told her so much about them. She smiled, curling further into a ball next to Luffy. The thought of his smile comforted her enough for her to sleep. Ace had wanted to stay next to Luffy, but he was feeling guilty about what happened. How did Luffy always manage to worry him? It had always been an issue, but it seemed as if Luffy had been making it his personal mission to do so since he'd taken him from Marineford. It conflicted Ace's emotions having Luffy older than him. He was supposed to look after Luffy, not the other way around. He walked the long corridors trying to find a way out, but the tunnels were never ending. He came across strange creatures from time to time, but nothing he couldn't handle. He began to feel tired. Maybe everything was catching up to him. For months before this he had been hunting Blackbeard, then he had to endure impelled down and then watch most of his family die. And with Luffy constantly around him, he hadn't had a second to mourn. He wouldn't cry in front of Luffy, so he had to bottle it up. He turned a corner and sat down on a relatively dry area against the wall. He couldn't be prouder of his little brother, but sometimes, he needed his quiet alone time. He still didn't feel like his normal self. To do that he needed to move on, but with everything going this proved difficult. Maybe when he saw his pop's grave he would feel better. His vision began to narrow. He didn't remember when he started to feel so sleepy. He couldn't concentrate. He needed to go check up on Luffy. He tried to stand but his balance was off and he fell to the ground. Luffy squinted, one eye open, and then the other. He didn't know where he was, but he could feel Yumi leaning against him, and Ace's hockey was relatively close by. He stretched. Ouch, he hurt everywhere. Stupid rain, he thought to himself. Where did it come from? It wasn't normal rain. It stung like walking through a million rose bushes, on fire, covered in poison. He grunted and looked down at Yumi. He shook her awake. She moaned but looked up. The instant she saw Luffy awake she jumped into his arms with a sob. You're okay. She sniffled. She, of course. Your skin even looks like it's gone back to normal. Yosh, Luffy yelled. Do you know where we are? Nope, he said, popping the pea. Where's Ace? He went out to explore the cavern. Luffy nodded, looking around. This cave was even cooler than the last, the roof was double the height. He stared in awe at the flora and fauna around him. The plants were a vibrant array of colors and smells. Lizards lay in the petals of huge flowers waiting for insects to be attracted to the flower's scent. The large red stingrays they had seen earlier were everywhere, cooling in the water or burrowing under the sand. "Whoa," Luffy said, looking around. "Let's go explore," he added, looking over at the tunnels leading off the main cavern. "But you're still hurt, and shouldn't we wait for Ace?" "Nah, let's go. We'll meet him on the way." Yumi didn't look sure but followed Luffy anyways. There were so many tunnels in the cave, all leading off in different directions. The crystal walls lit their way as they trudged through the shallow water. Luffy called out to Ace. Surely he couldn't have gone far. At one point they came across what appeared to be a giant wasp. Its mandibles clicked when it came up to them. "Whoa, it's so big it fills up the whole tunnel," Luffy chuckled. "It's a giant bug," Yumi squealed, grabbing onto Luffy. "What, you're afraid of bugs?" "Yes," she said, her eyes downcast. She, it's just a bug," Luffy said as tears of laughter filled his eyes. "It's a giant bug. She. Just get rid of it, please," she whimpered. "Sanji can make a soup out of bugs." "Ew, gross, they're slimy." "We should go bug hunting, Luffy, please." He laughed but got the wasp to move down a different tunnel. They continued their search for Ace, looking around corners and down tunnels, but to no avail. Luffy began to notice Yumi was falling behind. "Come on," he shouted back at her. She was acting weird. Maybe she'd eaten a bug by accident. Luffy chuckled to himself. He shrugged it off and continued to walk. Due to the shallow depth of the water, it didn't make him feel weak. In fact, as he walked and kicked the water, any place it landed on his skin felt soothed and cool. He noticed the footsteps behind him had stopped. He turned around. "What's up, Yumi?" he asked, cocking his head to the side. She didn't look so good. "I feel sick," she said, holding her stomach. He walked over and picked her up. She snuggled into his chest and was in no time asleep. Luffy looked at her. His eyebrows came together, forming a knot of muscles between his brows. He didn't like this. She was too pale. He needed to find Ace and get Law to take a look at her. He walked for another half hour. He had used up a lot of haki trying to keep Ace and Yumi safe earlier, and though most had returned, he still couldn't seem to find Ace. He could feel which direction he was in. It was like the connection was fuzzy. "Ace," he called. He turned a corner and found Ace sleeping against the cave wall. Luffy pouted. Of course he'd fallen asleep. No wonder he was so hard to find. Stupid narcolepsy. Walking closer to Ace, something seemed off. Something was wrong. He shook Ace, but he didn't wake up. Luffy yelled into his ear and sprayed water onto his face. There was not even a slight reaction. His face was statue-like, not a single muscle twitched no matter what Luffy did. Luffy began to fret even more. What was going on? He picked up Ace, placed him securely on his shoulders and began to run. He needed to find a way out. He sprinted through the corridors using his haki to try guide him. Unfortunately, even after all his years as a pirate, he still was awful with directions. Not as bad as Zoro, but close enough to find every tunnel looked the same, and thus he went around in circles. Finally he noticed an opening up ahead and ran in that direction. He made it to the end of the tunnel and groaned. It was another cavern, except this one was slightly different than the last. Ace awoke feeling groggy. There was sleep in his eyes, so initially his surroundings were blurred. He heard voices, so he sat up, rubbing at his face whilst trying to flatten out his bed hair with his other arm. Where the hell was he? He looked around. He was in a small alcove. Yumi was asleep on the bed next to where he had been laying. He stood up and walked through a vine-covered entrance. The cavern wasn't too different to the others he'd seen, except the roof was way up above him. A huge hole was in its center. A machine was just underneath it. Directly below the machine and hole, on the only patch of dry ground, was a science lab. Metal wires and pipes were leading off everywhere from it. Most up to the ceiling or through walls, but a large portion led towards an elevated section of dark water. In the middle lay a teenage girl engulfed by the water, except for her head which just tipped the surface. Her blonde hair contrasted with the water and was laid out around her, moving with the currents. Ace felt shivers run up his spine. This place was eerie, especially with the only sounds being the dripping of water. He started walking around the shallow pool with the lady inside it. He leaned closer. Her face looked like it had never seen the sun. It was as white as sea foam. He leaned further across the water. "AC," Shocked by the sudden outburst, Ace had to lean heavily against the pool's dark marbled edge to avoid falling in. His little brother still managed to knock him to the ground though. She, you're finally awake," he said with a smile, sitting cross-legged on top of him. "Get off," he grumbled, grumpy he'd gotten shocked but relieved Luffy was okay. "Where are we?" he asked, standing up. Luffy shrugged. "A cave." "Helpful," Ace smirked. "What happened?" "You and Yumi fell asleep. I found a doctor for you. He's really cool but not as cool as Chopper." Where is this doctor now?" Luffy answered by pointing up. Ace didn't notice at first, but amidst all the pipes on the ceiling there was a scaffold running along the sides of the wall. On one of said scaffolds stood a man wearing a white lab coat. He had light blonde hair styled into 2 spikes atop his head. "Hey Dr. Guy." "Ace is awake. It's Dr. Bubo," he corrected him with a sigh as he came down towards him. "You have healed amazingly quickly, Ace. Anyone else with that amount of toxin in their system wouldn't last half as long." On closer inspection, Ace could see the man was wearing large round spectacles that doubled the size of his eyes, and his nose was large and curved down. He did remind Ace of an owl. "Will the kid be okay?" Ace asked. "She had much less toxin in her system than you did, and it circled slower because of her lack of movement. She should be fine. What amazes me is your brother's recovery. He didn't even need the antitoxin." Ace looked over at Luffy, who was now sitting cross-legged on the ground. "Luffy, how is that possible?" "Probably from my fight with Magellan." Ace lowered his gaze. His heart felt like it leapt up into his throat as he realized what that probably meant. He gulped, shaking that thought from his mind. "Who's the girl?" he asked, looking at the pool. "That's my sister Nien. She contracted a disease a year back and her health has been deteriorating ever since." "Why's she in a pool?" Luffy asked, tilting his head. "The water is laced with a refined version of the medicine from the stingray's tails," the doctor answered. "Will that fix her?" Luffy asked. "I've been trying to alter the composition of her medicine, but nothing seems to work." The man began to shed tears. They got caught behind his glasses and he had to take them off and clean them. Ace thought he looked weird without glasses, but he didn't say anything. Luffy, however. "You look weird without glasses." The man sniffled and returned them. "Guess it's a good thing I can't see without them." "Why don't you take your sister to another doctor?" Ace asked, changing the subject. "The disease is contagious. I can't even touch her." The man began to cry again. "You sure do cry a lot," Luffy said. "My sister is dying," he whimpered. "I guess that's an okay reason to be a crybaby. I think I remember you crying a lot when I was dying, Luffy," Ace teased. Luffy scrunched up his face. "That was different," he whined. "No, it wasn't." Ace laughed. Luffy grumbled but looked back towards the Owlman. "Hey, you saved Ace and Yumi. We'll get TRA guy to save your sister." "Luffy, I don't think Trafalgar will AGR," Ace began. "Sure you will. Let's go get him," Luffy interrupted. "No, you can't leave, not right now. Actually, you should hide, go back to the alcove," Bubo blubbered. "Why?" Ace and Luffy asked in unison. "They'll be here soon. It's not safe," he said, looking side to side, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Geez, this guy was a wimp, Ace thought to himself. She, of course it's safe, we're pirates. Pirates? You don't get out much, do you, Dr. Owl Guy? Ace teased. Owl? Who are you afraid of? Ace asked. See, Saito, he and his gang found out I was harvesting the stingrays and refining the liquid in their tails to medicine. He's been making me refine the toxins for months for him to sell. Refine? Ace asked. Yes, I can make them more deadly, just like how I make the liquid from the male's tails more medicinal. Luffy, come on, let's go. Ace, I said I'd help him. Luffy. Ace began to try reason with him, but one look at Luffy, Ace could tell that he wasn't going to budge. Fine, we beat up the bandits and go. She and get TRA guy. Ace glared at Luffy but gave in. Let's go then, he sighed. Luffy ran off and Ace followed close behind, but not before he looked back at the doctor. Something wasn't right. Part of him was slightly excited to go though. The last time Luffy and he had fought together had been Marineford. This was going to be fun. After wandering the tunnels, Ace struck up a conversation. So last time we talked you had a swordsman, a navigator, a liar, a chef, a reindeer, a big duck and a princess on your crew. I believe you got some new members from what I saw in the papers. Did you finally get your musician? Yep. He's a skeleton named Brooke. We also got a shipwright named Frankie, an archaeologist named Robin, and a fishman. A fishman, hey? I had a friend who was a fishman. Oh yeah, you know Jimbei, don't you? Jimbei? Ace exclaimed gobsmacked. Yosh, he joined your crew? Yep, ha 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 ha, he really took my request to heart, Ace laughed. Yeah, he's super cool. The two of them suddenly came across the bandits' hideout. The man they assumed was Saito was a 7-foot-tall man with black slicked-back slimy hair. He was crazily thin but moved fluidly. He lay on his back on a large rock. Up so high in the air, no reflective light from the crystal walls reached him. Thus he was covered in shadows. His lackeys were moving large crates around the base filled with vials of an ice-blue liquid. Ace and Luffy walked in T around inspecting the cavern intrigued. Who are you? The bandit leader said smoothly. His eyes were looking at them with harsh curiosity. So when we finally reunite with your crew, Jimbei will be there. It'll be great to see him again. Ace asked, completely ignoring the question. Yosh, he'll be so surprised to see you, Luffy chuckled. The bandit leader hissed to get their attention. Hey, you're Baito, right? Luffy asked. Saito. The man corrected passive-aggressively, his pupils dilating. Ace, this is the guy we're beating up, right? Yeah, Luffy. What? The man asked. We're going to kick your ass, Luffy said with a grin. A couple of the men ran up to them with swords after hearing this. Ace jumped and Luffy whipped out his leg, knocking them over. More circled around them. Another one jumped at them and received a fire fist to the face for his efforts. One attacked Luffy and hit the ground from being hit from one of Luffy's own punches. Ace and Luffy stood back to back. Ace would occasionally give Luffy a boost before ducking while he used his Gatling gun. Other times Luffy would punch through Ace and hit an attacker. It had been many years since Luffy had fought beside Ace, but it felt like no time had passed at all. They worked in perfect unison, using each other's abilities in combination with their own. It was fun and Luffy could feel the excitement and adrenaline pumping through him. Soon the number of attackers waned and the remaining bandits became weary. Neither Ace nor Luffy had even built up a sweat. The attackers were stronger than the average man, but useless against the pirates. They brought out pistols that proved especially useless, and at that thought the last few men standing ran off in fear. The leader slowly rose from his rock, his anger-filled eyes almost glowed in the consuming shadows. Each step he made was purposeful and slow, he almost looked graceful. Luffy cocked his head looking at the man. He reminded him of something. He scratched his head thinking. In the meantime the man finally made it to the ground. He moved as if he had to reserve as much energy as possible. He walked towards the two brothers, insanity present in his face. His long dark cloak embellished with red patterns slid along behind him. Ace, he looks mad, Luffy stated with a chuckle. No kidding. Ace replied with a smirk. Come and get me, the man smirked. Luffy, unlike Ace, didn't hesitate and ran straight towards the creepy man. Luffy, wait. Ace tried to warn him, but he was too late. Luffy had fallen through the floor and into an abyss below. Ace was about to worry when he heard his brothers laugh. She Ace. I'm on a sticky net. Yubaka, haven't you learnt yet not to rush into battles? Hey, you do it too. I just did it first this time. Ace sighed and looked up, but the man was gone. He looked back into the abyss and saw 100 red eyes staring back at him. He'd seen a lot of weird things, but this easily made the top 10. The creature staring at him was a crazy mix of spider and human. And not just any spider, a ginormous red-backed spider. Its pincers clicked and grinded together and poison dribbled out of its disgusting mouth. The black creature ignored him and began to crawl towards Luffy, who was still playing in what Ace now realized to be web. Luffy, that spider is coming towards you, he warned. Luffy looked up and saw the creature. Whoa, so cool. Ace chuckled, his little brother would never change. He took a breath and jumped into the shadowy abyss. Candle Heart. Chapter 14, Uru Island Part 3, and an unexpected surprise. Why did he always have to clean up Straw Hat Yaw's mess? Law grumbled to himself from the deck of the Polar Tang. Luffy always had to cause some sort of trouble for him. It was almost as if he was a magnet for trouble. Not only had he not come back within the allocated time Law had allowed for him, But he had also managed to get caught in toxic rain, the baka. Law had tried to get to Straw Hat Yaw before the rain had hit, but by the time he arrived to the place that rented out the sand ships, it was already too late. So he had gone back to his own ship and decided to wait out the rain under the sea. However, whilst under the water he noticed something. The rain only went just past the side of the island, before suddenly stopping. They had surfaced the submarine and were now sailing around the perimeter of the island. It was a relatively round island excluding a small protrusion from the west side. They had noticed on their trip around the island that the rain did not encompass the whole surface of the island. The north shore was hardly rained upon, whilst on the other side to the south the rain went about a kilometer out to sea. The rain is coming from somewhere, Law said, leaning on the railing as he gazed out onto the dark island. So what do we do? Beppo asked his captain. Trusting Straw Hat Yaw, he will be at the very center of it, so as soon as the rain stops, that's where we will go. Judging from the surface of the rain, the center of the rainstorm should be just slightly to the south, Beppo said. Let's go back to the East Harbor. We'll wait there till the rain lets up. Yes, Captain. Ace landed on the giant spider's back. He clung to it as it fell down toward Luffy. Ace, I want to ride it too. Ace rolled his eye and jumped onto a ledge on the side of the abyss. He needed to free Luffy from the web. Fire fist, he yelled out as he punched his flaming fist into the web. Luffy looked over and blinked. That sucked, Luffy said, looking at the undamaged web. I don't see you trying to find a way out, Ace countered. She. The spider then jumped towards Ace. He was about to jump up and out of the abyss when he noticed that a web was now covering the way out. The spider must have done it while he was trying to get Luffy out. He jumped to another ledge on the other side of the hole and lifted his fists to engage the spider. It shot clumps of web at him. He dodged and ran across the wall and kicked the spider in the face. It landed on the web and crawled back up towards him. The creature had hockey. Oi Luffy. I'll deal with the bug. You find a way to free yourself. Spispy, Saito laughed. My web is indestructible. Once my prey is caught, they can never get out. Ace shot fire at the man to shut him up and distract him from Luffy. Ace gets to have all the fun. Luffy grumbled under his breath as he tried to struggle his way out. Nothing was working. He hated this stupid sticky stuff. Not even Ace's fire could burn it. He looked down into the abyss. There was a ledge sticking out that he could grab onto. He stretched out the only part of his arm that wasn't stuck and grabbed onto the ledge. He then began to retract his arm and pull. The web stretched and went down with him. He eventually got to the ledge and looked up. Ace and that spider were fighting. And although Ace was stronger, they were fighting in the spider's element, and the more webs the spider shot out, the fewer places there were for Ace to stand. Most of the walls of the abyss were now sticky with the web, and almost all of the ledges were covered in it. Luffy had to get free and fast. An idea suddenly came to mind. He smirked and aimed himself towards the spider. Ace, watch out! He yelled before letting go of the ledge. The web was like his own rubber body and acted like a slingshot. He flew towards the spider and hit him. But now he was in an even worse predicament. Not only was he still attached to the original web, he was stuck to the spider and the web roof of the giant hole. Ace found it hilarious. He had jumped onto a ledge and was laughing his head off. The spider, however, was not so impressed. It began to snip away at the web, cutting itself free, but leaving Luffy in the exact same situation. Once it was free, it went after Ace again. Luffy wiggled trying to free himself again, but to no avail. He then noticed a familiar hockey presence coming towards him. Yumi, he exclaimed, looking up at her. Hey Luffy, she smiled, looking down at him from the side of the abyss. You gotten yourself in a bit of a tangle, she giggled. She, I'll get myself out soon. Here, I'll help. Do you have some really big scissors? No, I made a friend on the way here, she smiled. From behind her, a giant wasp came into view. Whoa, you became friends with the bug. I know, he's actually really friendly. She, that's great, Yumi. She beckoned the insect over. It began using its giant mandibles to cut the web, and in no time, Luffy was free. He didn't hesitate in jumping in and helping Ace. He landed on the creature's back just like Ace did earlier. Ace jumped out of the abyss onto solid ground. The creature followed with Luffy on his back. The ball was now in their court as the spider didn't have its massive web around it. Luffy went into second gear, attacking the creature with his fists and legs. Ace shot fire into its face, and the giant wasp, as the spider's natural enemy, joined the fray as well. Within no time at all, Luffy landed a final blow that knocked the Spider-Man out. Ace cleared his hands of dirt by clapping them in a sideways motion and smiled at Luffy, who returned the grin tenfold. They tied Saito up and jumped onto the back of the giant wasp. That was fun. Luffy chuckled from behind Yumi. Ha 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 ha, excluding the part where you were stuck you mean? Ace teased from the back of the wasp. Yumi giggled as the wasp turned the last corner into the cavern with the owl guy. Upon seeing them atop a giant wasp, with a knocked-out giant spider behind them, the doctor's jaw dropped. "We beat him up," Luffy yelled out. "Oh, that is wonderful," Dr. Bubo exclaimed. The three of them jumped down from the wasp's back. The wasp dropped the spider guy and scuttled off down the tunnel. Ace started wandering around the cavern and Luffy ran towards the doctor. "Now we just need to get TRA guy to fix up your sister." "Not him," Yumi whined. She, and he's already close by too." "Oh goody," she said sarcastically. Ace was walking up the scaffold, investigating all the wires and machinery. Something wasn't quite right. He had suspected it for hours, but he had no proof of it. Luffy was generally a very poor judge of character and instantly befriended anyone who helped him. Ace, however, was just slightly more suspicious. He came to the machine sitting just below the large hole in the cavern roof. He walked around it, investigating it. He had a theory, and just needed to prove it. "Young man," the owl guy called from below, "would you please come down from there? My work is very delicate." Ace saw a large tube leading down from the machine. On closer inspection, he noticed a bright blue liquid coming down from it. The tube next to it had a clearer liquid running down into the pool below where the girl, Nien, lay. He saw a lever off to the side. He smirked. His inner rebel could never really resist a mystery. "Don't," the doctor yelled. He pulled the lever down. The instant he did, black smog rose from the top of the machine and out the hole in the ceiling. The two liquids began to flow down the tubes. He reached up his hand into the dark smoke. Intense pain suddenly radiated through that arm. It was a familiar pain. The same pain that he had experienced only a few hours ago, in the toxic rain. "Luffy," he called out. "This guy is the one who made the toxic rain." Luffy looked at the doctor and tilted his head. The doctor sighed, but then began to laugh. The waste from the toxin and the medicine, nay, I'm afraid it had nowhere to go but up. "You hired that spider guy?" Yumi squeaked. "I had to get money from somewhere, didn't I?" Luffy frowned. "That rain hurt Ace and Yumi, and all the villagers who gave us meat. Surely you understand, pirate. Some things are worth it. I started refining the medicine only a few months ago. The results are amazing." Luffy lowered his straw hat to cover his eyes, and without another word he slammed a fist into the older man's face, knocking him back. The doctor wiped blood from his mouth and got up. He stretched out his arms. As he did so, they turned into huge wings. His hooked nose hardened and transformed into a beak. His legs grew and became yellow and scaly, his toenails curved into talons. Finally, feathers began to grow all over his large body. He had turned into an 8-foot horned owl. He screeched and launched himself into the air. He circled the room before turning at Luffy and headed in a beeline towards him. His sharp talons were stretched out in front of him. Luffy prepped himself and jumped over the owl. He twisted in midair and hit him from behind. Ace jumped down and joined the fray. He shot red-hot flames from his pointer fingers straight at the owl. The owl dodged them and attempted to rake its claws along Ace's side. Ace used Haki to stop him. He bent down and Luffy jumped over him and used his leg to whip the owl in the face. The owl hooted and flew around the room. He started destroying the crystal walls. "What's he doing?" Luffy asked. "He's getting rid of the light," Yumi exclaimed. Ace and Luffy looked around and noticed she was right. Every time the owl destroyed a crystal, the room got darker. Eventually it got to the point where none of them could see anything. "No problem," Luffy exclaimed, running off. "Luffy, wait," Ace sighed, running after them. They began to fight with the owl doctor again. This time in complete darkness. They scuffled, hit, dodged, stretched and shot fire. Until suddenly, the owl's Haki disappeared. "Where'd he go?" Ace said, looking around. "He got Yumi," Luffy yelled, running towards an opening to a tunnel. Ace ran after him, glad now that there was light. They followed the haki and turned a corner to see. Yumi was not happy. Luffy and Ace had left her all alone in the dark, and the bird had snatched her. He had flown through the tunnels until he came to a more open one where he stopped and pinned her to the ground. She was terrified. What was she going to do? The owl bent down and his beak opened up to rip her tiny body to shreds. She whimpered in fear, but steeled herself. She had one trick up her sleeve. She clenched her fists. A giant panther suddenly turned the corner. Its pearly white teeth were epically sharp and its claws even more so. Its low growl sent shivers down even her own spine. The owl screeched and began to back away from the giant nightmare creature. Yumi didn't move, she hardly even breathed. She put all of her concentration on making the giant panther look as realistic as possible. This had to work. She knew the one thing all birds were afraid of was big cats, and this one she knew quite well, from her first few days with Luffy. Because of her training with him at that time, she had gotten good enough with her devil fruit to be able to be touched by animals and zone devil fruit eaters in their animal forms, whilst making visions. However, she still couldn't make a sound, be touched by a human or move. The owl backed into a corner. She made the large black panther follow him whilst making a low deep growling noise. She was just beginning to think that the owl would see through her vision because it wasn't attacking him, when Luffy and Ace burst around the corner at top speed. Ace stopped and stared at the giant cat for a second, but Luffy, unfazed by her vision, jumped towards the owl and landed the final blow. He was knocked to the ground, unconscious. "You okay?" Luffy asked. "Yeah, just a bit shaken," she replied. Ace shook his head as the panther disappeared. His eyes were wide. "That was awesome," he exclaimed. Yumi blushed and looked away. "Yosh, let's go back." "What?" both Yumi and Ace asked. "I said I'd get Law to help his sister, so I will." "That giant owl tried to kill us," Yumi almost screamed. "Yeah, but his sister didn't. Let's go. TRA guy is almost there." Law was not impressed. When he walked around the corner into a dark cave to see Luffy, Ace and the little girl. They were huddled around Firefist as he was producing fire that lit up the area around him. "Are you always an idiot, or is it just when I'm around?" he asked, walking into the room. "TRA guy, can you do me a favor?" Law's eye began to twitch. "What is it this time?" "There is a girl in that pool over there. She's sick, can you fix her?" "Oh, and Ace's hand needs fixing too." Law accepted his fate and said, "Fine." He attended to Firefist first before going over to the girl. He checked her over, and had no trouble using his devil fruit to heal her. "I'm done. Can we go now? Will she wake up soon?" "Yes." "Then let's go." Dr. Bubo awoke in the shallow puddles of his workshop. There was little light, but that didn't matter as he could see in the dark. He looked around and saw Saito lying unconscious and tied up in a corner. He stood up and walked over to his sister. All he wanted was for her to wake up, nothing else mattered. No one else's life was more important than hers, she was so young and pure. He had started out with good intentions, but looking down at her statuesque face he realized, at some point he had lost his way. It probably started with the stingray experiments and had escalated to the toxic rain. He had only wanted those boys to go away, but after they had found out about the toxic rain he had to get rid of them. Now they would tell others, and he would never get the opportunity to find a cure. He fell to his knees at the side of the pool and wept. "Bubo?" Now he was hearing things. "Bubo, is that you?" "Nien?" He stood up and looked into the water. His little sister was now awake and sitting up. "Bubo, where are we?" she asked. That young boy must have kept his promise. His friend must have healed her. He jumped into the shallow pool and kneeled at her side. He pulled her into his chest and wept. "Nien, I have made a huge mistake. I hurt so many people to heal you." "Big brother," she said, tears beginning to form in her own eyes. "I'm sorry," he blubbered. She looked upset and disappointed, but she returned his hug and said, "It'll all be okay. Tell me everything." "Captain, you got Straw Hat back," the white polar bear exclaimed. "Yeah," Law replied, walking onto the deck. Ace couldn't help but overhear him mumble under his breath. "That stupid Straw Hat Yaw doesn't even know the meaning of the word fear. The Baka doesn't know the meaning of a lot of words." Ace chuckled at the pirate. He couldn't quite figure out if Law considered Luffy a friend or whether he just hated him. Within no time at all they were again headed towards his grave. After a discussion with Polar Bear, he had discovered they should be there within a few days. Ace, come on. We're almost there, Luffy said, running up the hill. Ace, however, didn't have that much enthusiasm. He didn't really know what he would find at the top of the hill, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. They reached the top and Ace felt a little part of him die inside. He looked out across the land and saw the amount of graves. He couldn't believe it wasn't real. How many people in his family had died trying to save him? Hey Luffy. Yeah? Can you give me a minute? Luffy nodded and walked back down the shore. He was now alone. He wandered all the graves. He recognized each of the swords sticking up out of the ground. He said the name of each owner as he passed. He lapped back around and saw his own grave. He leant forward and grabbed his dagger and hat. They were slightly worn, but appeared someone had been taking good care of them. He placed his hat on his head and dagger at his side. He then approached Whifather was gone. He had been gone for years now. He gulped, trying to hold back tears, but to no avail. They fell onto the cold stone of the tombstone. He fell onto his knees and let all the emotion he had been bottling up out. He gulped down air and wiped away his tears. You were the best father I could ever have asked for, Pops. He paused for a second to breathe. Your soul will forever be eternal, rest in peace. Ace had been sitting in a state of numbness for over an hour now. He tilted up his head and noticed the flowers littered around the two graves. He stood up and ran his hands over the words on his and Whitebeard's grave. He then noticed a small box with a bottle of sake and 3 cups. Luffy must have put them there. A worn newspaper then caught his attention. He picked it up and sat down on top of his gravestone and tried to read the faded writing. The Straw Hats Revival, hey. He smirked. Wonder who put this on my grave? Ace put back the newspaper and wandered around the graves again, saying a final goodbye to his old friends. Luffy was getting impatient. He ran back up the hill at Law's protest and looked around. Ace wasn't there. He scratched his head and sat down cross-legged in front of his brother's fake grave. He noticed Ace's hat and dagger were gone as well. He decided to sit and wait for Ace to return. After about 10 minutes he was beginning to become impatient again when a familiar face began to walk up to him. I thought it was you, Straw Hat Yoi. Pineapple Head, Luffy exclaimed. It's good to see you again. You here to visit Ace Yoi? Nope, the old man. You're a strange one, Yoi. She. Where's Ace's stuff? Did you take it? Nope. Strange, he said, looking around. He then looked to Luffy and smiled. I heard you're the new king of the pirates. Ace would be proud, Marco said, changing the topic. Yosh, it's pretty cool. What? Ace exclaimed from behind Marco. How could you not tell me you were king of the pirates, Luffy? I forgot. Luffy said with a chuckle. Marco slowly turned around to look at Ace. His normally sleepy-looking eyes were wide, his pupils were huge and his mouth was slacked open. Ace? He asked in a hoarse whisper. Ace rubbed the back of his head and grinned. Long time no see, Marco. Candle Heart Chapter 15 Surprise. Marco looked gobsmacked, to say the very least. He still hadn't moved and Ace was beginning to worry he had stopped breathing. Ace was glad to see him, but right now he could only concentrate on one thing. Luffy just happened to forget to mention he became the Pirate King. Ace always knew he could do it, but so soon after he died, it was crazy. He was almost mirroring Marco's surprise. She. What the? Ho, how are you alive, Yoi? Marco stammered. I saved him, Luffy said with an irritating grin. Then where the hell have you been, Yoi? Marco, Luffy only saved me the other day. Marco's eyes narrowed. What? I can travel through time, Luffy chuckled. Marco's eyes widened again. Is this some joke, Luffy? Because it's not funny, Yoi. Nope. It's the real me, Marco, Ace said with a nervous grin. Marco took a deep breath and sighed. I know, I can recognize your hockey, but still, this is unreal, Yoi. Tell me about it. Marco took a few steps forward and raised his arm. Ace gripped it and smiled as they pulled each other into a short embrace and patted each other's backs. It hasn't been the same without you, Ace Yoi. I'm glad to be back. They smirked and looked back at Luffy, who had been watching the encounter in silence. You really can pull of miracles, can't you, Pirate King Yoi? She. He's still the same as ever though. You never know what stupid thing he's going to do next, Ace smirked. I have some stories you'll love to hear, but first, everyone will want to see you, Yui. The rest of the crew? Yes, Yui. Ace, let's go, Luffy exclaimed excitedly, standing up. Within a second he'd run off down the hill. Marco turned to go as well, but he stopped when he noticed Ace hadn't moved. I'll miss him, Ace said, looking up at Whitebeard's majestic gravestone. We all miss him, Marco replied, gazing up with him. Come on, at some point you just have to accept it and walk down the hill. Otherwise you'll be here forever, Yui. Marco placed his hand on Ace's shoulder to comfort him. Ace took one last deep breath and said a final silent goodbye. Once he was done he slowly turned and followed Marco down the hill. He stopped halfway down to remove a rebel tear and just couldn't help but make one last promise. I will carry your will for the rest of my life, Pops. Straw Hat, we didn't expect to see you here, visiting Ace. Haruta, the 12th Division commander, said with a smile. Shishishishi. Luffy laughed. The man Luffy recognized as the old 5th Division commander, Vista, walked up to him and patted his back. Congratulations on becoming Pirate King, we were all rooting for you. It was so cool. Luffy grinned. I guess you came here to tell Ace all about it. How long are you staying? Jozu asked. However long Ace needs. Ah, that's sweet, Luffy, but you're going to have to leave at some point, your crew will get impatient. Haruta smiled sympathetically. TRA guy took us here, Trafalgar Law? Vista asked. Yep. Why? Jozu asked. My crew are busy doing a favor for me. So who'd you come with? Izo cut in. My new crew member and Ace. Luffy chuckled. The whole crew tilted their heads to the side. What do you mean? Jozu asked. Luffy answered by pointing up at the top of the hill where Marco and Ace were walking down together. To say the Whitebeard crew was surprised would be an understatement. Upon seeing Ace and Marco walk down the hill together, most of them couldn't believe it. There was a mixed range of emotions varying anywhere between anger, betrayal, sadness, and some were even so shocked they fainted. GGG Ghost. One of them yelled out, running towards the water. Ace, upon hearing this, ran down the mountain to them. Marco close behind. Ooh, he teased. Marco kicked back his head and laughed as half of the crew scattered in fear. The division commanders and a few other stronger members were wide-eyed and confused, but could tell that Ace was no ghost. It took a while, but after his old crewmates finally recovered from their shock, they all tackled him in a huge pile and he was showered by a feeling he had missed dearly. His family smothered him with joy and happiness, and insisted on having a celebration. Within no time music was playing and food was being served. Ace noticed Luffy didn't mind at all, considering he was stuffing his face. Granted, Ace was sitting right next to him doing the exact same thing. He still couldn't believe Luffy hadn't said anything about being Pirate King. He decided he'd sort it out later, as other things were on his mind. So what happened after the war? Ace asked with his mouth full. The crew all put on either a guilty or sad expression after hearing Ace's question, but Marco was the one to answer. We tried to take on Teach Yui, and we failed, Yui, Marco answered. Rather miserably. Someone added. Ace clenched his fists and scrunched up his face. This was all my fault. No, Ace. We went after him. We were bent on revenge, Yui, Marco said. How many died? After that fight and everything that happened with Weevil, a lot, Yui. We made our own decisions, Jozu began to say. None among who lived or died had any regrets, Ace. Ace wasn't convinced, but let it go for the time being. Oi kid, Law looked over to Yumi. Go over to that celebration and tell Straw Hat Ya goodbye for me. You're leaving? She said, almost hopeful looking. Oh, please hold the tears, he said sarcastically. Yumi rolled her eyes. And yes, I am. I can only deal with so many crazy pirates. I'll find out what happens with Firefist Ya in the papers. We don't even get to say goodbye? Beppo asked. We'll see them again soon, Beppo, Law grunted. The white polar bear ran up and gave Yumi a hug and sniffled. Yumi smiled and waved as she left the ship, happy she was finally free of the PSHYCO Dr. Pirate. She told Luffy the message, which he didn't react well to, and introduced herself to the Whitebeard pirates and joined the festivities. To Ace, our very own 2nd Division commander, returned even from the dead to come back to us, a drunken Whitebeard pirate toasted. A chorus of drunken shouts rang out in response. Ace and Luffy laughed. "So Luffy, looks like you need a way to get back to your crew. Want a lift, yoy?" Marco asked. "Yosh!" Luffy yelled out. The celebration was now in full swing. Food and sake were passed around, music was playing, tales from the past few years were told to Ace, and Luffy provided interesting entertainment, which involved either chopsticks or stretching. One after another the pirates fell asleep until it was only Ace and the remaining commanders left. "So where are we headed, yoy?" "I'm not sure. We'll have to ask Luffy in the morning," Ace replied. "I still can't believe you're alive." Haruta smiled, looking up at the stars. "I don't think any of us can, yoy." Marco smiled. "Pops would be happy," Jozu stated. Luffy said he messaged Pops and let him know I was okay. Ace smirked. The others all smiled with him and slowly fell asleep together. "I'm going to buy some ingredients to make a delicious meal for Nami Swan and Robin Schwan." Sanji was almost skipping around the food stalls. He had left the two girls sunbaking with a delicious fruity cocktail and was now going to make them lunch. His crazy captain still hadn't returned and the meeting was going to be this afternoon. He would be worried, but unless Luffy did something absolutely insane, he trusted he would be fine. He was running through the list of ingredients he needed through his head when he saw a beautiful lady from in front of him. Sanji felt his nose start bleeding as he looked at this new eye candy. She had the perfect 3 sizes, purple hair, and was wearing fishnet stockings. Her bag had broken and she was bending over to pick up all the bananas that had fallen out. Sanji walked up behind her and picked up one of the bananas. "Excuse me, beautiful, may I give my assistance?" The lady slowly lifted her head. As she did so, Sanji slowly felt HSH. He felt like his soul was slowly dying and leaving his soul to escape to any hell better than the one he had just put himself into. He'd made a huge mistake, and he was instantly regretting it. A cold shiver ran down his spine. "Oh Sanji boy, it's been far too long. I'd love your help." Oh no. He hated that voice. What had he done? He squashed the banana in his hand and his curly eyebrow began to twitch. "There is not a chance in hell I'm helping you." He ran for the hills, not daring to look back. Not him, anyone but him. "Oh Sanji boy, where are you going? I missed you so much." The lady began to chase after him. Nope, 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 he was never wearing a dress again, never, nope. Others began to join the chase, all appeared at first glance to be beautiful women. But Sanji knew the ugly truth. These were the members of Hell, the Kamabaka Kingdom, and their queen was at the front of the rapidly growing horde, Emporio Ivankov, in his confusing female form. Robin was sitting back on a chair in the warm sun reading a book Koala had lent her. In the short time they had been there, she had already reacquainted herself with all the Revolutionary Army members she had gotten to know in the 2 years the crew had been apart. She looked around at the rest of the crew for the most part of their stay. Zoro had been asleep as per usual. Chopper had been talking to the Revolutionary Army doctors and had been exchanging medical information. Frankie had been doing the same except with mechanics and weaponry. Brook had been writing new songs. Jimbei had been scouting underwater around the island for threats. Usopp had been bored out of his brain and Nami had been shopping. She turned the page in her book and heard a strange noise. It sounded like a man being chased by a hungry pack of lions. She looked up just in time to see Sanji bolt past with an entourage of interesting characters chasing after him. She placed her hand over her mouth and chuckled. It appeared Sanji had finally met up with his old friends too. Zoro squinted one eye open and smirked. Usopp, who had been playing cards with the recently returned Chopper, Jimbei and Frankie, fell onto his back in hysterics. It didn't take long for the reindeer and the cyborg to follow suit. Even Jimbei chuckled slightly. "Yo ho 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 ho, you don't see that every day," Brook laughed. Sanji ran inside and shut the door. "I think I lost them," he said, breathing heavily. "Oi Eva, he's in here," Zoro yelled. "Oh Sanji boy, I have the most perfect dress for you to wear." Sanji's expression turned from relief to shock and ended up on pure loathing. "Stupid Marimo," he said, running out the back door. "Ha ha 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 ha, I'll get you for this," he yelled back at them as the purpled-haired man ran around the corner. Zoro smiled and relaxed. "It's so peaceful." Robin wondered what Sanji would look like in a dress. A picture of him arose to her mind in a bright yellow dress with lace. She chuckled, he'd look so kawaii. She glanced back down at her book and continued her reading. Sanji eventually returned from his chase and was now cooking everyone some lunch. Robin was still reading but was interrupted again when the doors were slammed open. "Where is he?" a familiar woman demanded, waltzing into the room. "Where's my love?" Sanji's nose started bleeding and Robin could have sworn she could see love hearts in his eyes. "Boa Schwan," he yelled out, running up to her. He fell to her feet. "Get out of my way, peasant. Where is my Luffy?" she said, walking over him as one would an entrance mat. "Hancock, it's nice to see you again," Nami smiled, walking over to her. Boa gave her a glare that would have sent a sea king back to the very bottoms of the sea. "Luffy isn't here yet," Zoro stated from the corner. "Where is he then?" "He went off with red-haired Shanks and hasn't returned," Chopper said with a frown. "Yeah, his Vivre card even disappeared," Frankie said. Hancock looked like she was about to faint. "We thought he might be dead," Robin chuckled. Boa wailed, falling to the ground. "Oh my poor darling, I should have never left your side." "Robin, Shanks said he was super okay," Frankie stated. Hancock brightened up. "Really? Of course he's okay, it's Luffy after all," Nami huffed. "When will he get here?" she asked with big eyes. "We thought he'd already be here by now. He must have been held up," Jinbei stated. She returned to her worried, wailing state. "Now calm down, Hancock. He's fine," Usopp said. "I shall stay here till my love returns," she said with conviction. "Are you coming to the meeting?" Robin asked her. Hancock glared at her, but answered. "Yes, I was invited," she said, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "Till then, can I interest you in some lunch?" Sanji asked from his crumpled position on the floor. "Yes," she answered. Later that afternoon, Robin heard someone clear their throat. She looked up from her book to see Koala. "What do you think, Robin? It is an interesting read, Koala." "Thank you for lending it to me," she said, looking at the page number and closing the book. "That's great, I'm glad you enjoyed it." Sabo walked up behind her and looked at Robin quizzically. "Hey Robin, was that your ship's cook I saw being chased by Eva earlier?" Robin chuckled. "Yes, that would have been him. My brother really collected a strange crew, didn't he?" "Indeed he did." She smiled. "Anyway Robin, are you ready? The meeting is in a half hour," Koala said with a smile. "Yes, I am," she said, standing up from her chair. "Excellent, let's go," Koala said with a twirl. "Chopper, Frankie, Brook, Usopp, I'm going, I'll see you in a few hours." "Bye Robin." They all called out before returning to look at Frankie's newest invention. She followed Sabo and Koala out the door. Hancock had heard the conversation and followed behind her. Robin sat next to Koala and Hancock in the meeting room. Almost all the Revolutionary Army members were there. Luffy's father, Dragon, stood up the front. Sabo stood next to him. Ivankov and Inazuma stood in the corner. A few other familiar faces were also there, including Bunny Joe, Terry Gilteo, Hack and Ray's Max. However, there were quite a few new and unknown faces around the room as well. Robin noticed a few were ex-slaves from the Celestial Dragon marks on their bodies. Dragon began making a formal welcome to all that attended and discussed some minor matters, mostly about locations of weapons, slavers' bases, deaths and where they will next meet. His tone got more serious as he brought out a message he had received. He explained it contained not only a list of every spy the government had, it also contained coded information as to where more weapons were being hidden. A man lifted his hand and volunteered to try decoding the information. Dragon agreed and handed him the letter. He then went on to address Robin. "What is it the Straw Hat Pirates wish to tell us?" Robin smiled sweetly. "Firstly, we know the location of a new city which is being built by the government. From what we could tell, there is a weapon being built there." Dragon nodded. "I will get the details of this from you later." Now, Dragon suddenly tensed up. A few others around the room did so as well. Robin couldn't help but notice it as well. A powerful presence was getting close. "Hancock," Robin whispered a warning. "You better get out of here." Within a second she was gone. Others began to catch on to the fact that something was up. Dragon opened his mouth to say something. Suddenly the roof collapsed, interrupting him. Marines flooded into the room. All hell broke loose. Fights were breaking out everywhere. Sabo's fire was swirling around and Eva's head doubled in size. A Marine ran up to Robin with a sword. She smiled and crossed her arms and snapped his head back. She looked at other revolutionaries struggling around her. and crossed her arms again. Cease fleur, clutch, 6 hands sprouted from each marine and cracked their bodies backwards. She continued to aid the revolutionaries until the marines' numbers began to dwindle. Eventually the LD in the room fell to silence. "We need to get the wounded to doctors," Dragon stated, looking around the room. A few men ran out to get doctors. "This is bad," she suddenly heard Sabo say. "What?" Dragon walked up him. On the ground lay the man who had volunteered to decode the letter, dead. "The letter is gone," Sabo said with a sigh. "Then we have to go get it," Dragon said. "We'll follow them, let's go," Sabo said, walking out of the room with Dragon. Everyone still standing followed them to get ready to leave. Koala stayed behind and looked over to Robin. "Sorry this happened, Robin." "It's quite alright, Koala. You and the Straw Hats can stay here, we'll deal with this. I'm sure Luffy would want us to go help his older brother. But what if he arrives while you're helping us? Chopper can stay behind and look after the wounded while waiting for him." Koala jumped up and down and hugged her. "Thanks, Robin, we need all the help we can get." "I'll go tell the others," she said with a smile. "I'll meet you at the dock," she said with a twirl and a wave. "So where are we headed, Luffy?" Ace asked with a smirk. "An island in the southern section of the East Blue," he replied. "Alright, let's set sail, Yui," Marco shouted out to his crew. Luffy went up and sat on the whale figurehead at the front of the ship. Ace and Yumi joined him after they set off. "Ready to see your crew again?" Ace asked. "Yeah, I miss them heaps," Luffy chuckled. "They're going to be so surprised when they see you." "I have no doubt." Ace laughed. She. The two brothers and Yumi sat side by side watching the horizon in comfortable silence.